Hey everyone, my name's Count. I'm a mixer and producer, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some wonderful artists that you will probably see named below on the screen. And during that process of working with these artists, one thing comes up over and over again, and that is sometimes you just need to make something sound a bit more lo-fi. And unfortunately, after trying damn near every plugin made that supposedly does this, I realized that I just didn't like any of them. So when Studio Rack was released, it gave me an opportunity to make my own lo-fi plugin, which is something I've been wanting to do for a really long time. So I've created this preset called Super Lo-Fi. So if you go into Load under Artist and then Count, you'll see Super Lo-Fi and give you an idea, first of all, of what it sounds like without Super Lo-Fi. Pretty straightforward, raw drum sound. Nothing really going on there. Here's with the Super Lo-Fi. So as you can see, there's a ton going on here. So let me just jump through each one of these macros and give you a better idea of kind of what these things are doing. So one of the first things that I usually need when I want something lo-fi is some degree of noise. And the Abbey Road vinyl plugin, it's kind of nailed that sound. And what I've done is I've mapped the noise knob to these three things, which are the noise part of the plugin. You got noise, crackle, and then density. So I can fade that in. You can see there that now the noise is quite loud. And then I can fade it all the way down. The next parameter is Breakup. And what I've used for Breakup is I just made this parallel split. So I got my dry signal coming out here. And then here, I've got the MDMX fuzz distortion, which can create some really sort of unnatural sounding distortions, which can be really useful for something when you want lo-fi. In particular, the breakup that I'm looking for is almost like a AM radio station going in and out, or a walkie-talkie. And you can see what I've done here is that I've mapped the breakup simply to this parallel split volume. So as I turn it up, you're just simply getting more or less of that distortion. So it really kind of breaks up in a nasty way, in a sort of unnatural way. What some people might call unmusical, but can be extremely useful if you're working on, something that you want to sound really just almost broken, like a broken speaker. So the next macro that I mapped was saturation, and it's just a simple on and off. And what I've done here is I've just taken an Abbey Road saturator and I made a multi-band split, so that if I want to retain some of the lows, mids, and highs, I can do so without sort of clobbering the entire sound at once. So I'm just turning it off and on. And what I'm doing there is I'm just giving it a little bit of a gentle push before I get into the more hard-edged distortions, which you can turn off. And you can hear the difference there. The fourth macro is called hard distortion. And what I've done here is I've created a parallel split, and I'm using the MDMX overdrive, which has a little bit more of a sharp-edged bite to it. And what I've done is I've mapped just the volume output of the distorted signal from this parallel split to this knob. And width. So it gives it this sort of like hard-edged grit to it. If you want something a little bit more natural, you back off the hard distortion. And if you want something that, is a little bit more in your face, you give it more hard distortion. The next macro that I mapped is called fat distortion. And what I've done is I've created a parallel split using the MDMX Screamer, which is just a little softer, a little bit more warm and sort of fatter sounding distortion. So if you're looking for a lo-fi that isn't quite so in your face or hard edged, you can use some of this fat distortion and back off on the hard distortion or mix them together. Let me go ahead and sort of cut the hard distortion first so you can hear the difference. Here's with none of the fat distortion or the hard distortion. And then fading in. And now both together. Pretty cool. So the next macro that I mapped was the Abbey Road vinyl plugin. And what I did was I just simply added an on and off switch with and without. That's on and off. You can really hear the difference more when you take off the other distortions and saturations. So you can hear a little bit more of that sort of puffy fatness. And then the raw. So the next macro that I mapped is probably the most important one for something like lo-fi. And I've called it LoFi Tone. Tone is such a huge part of lo-fi, right? We're limiting the sound to like the mids and really cutting the highs and lows in an extreme way. And what Studio Rack allowed me to do was to map multiple parameters to one knob, which allowed me to do what would normally take several different plugins or several different knobs of one plugin to sort of minimize the tone and make it more lo-fi. So what I've done is I've mapped the low frequency shelf, the high pass filter, and a low pass filter all at once with one knob. You can see how as I have the whole spectrum here versus like really just limiting the sound to just the mid-range. And you can hear the difference here. So that's the drums with the full range of the spectrum versus with the LoFi Tone as I boost. Pretty cool. So it's not just sort of taking a filter and sweeping it. It's sort of containing from the top end of the spectrum and the low end of the spectrum and really just minimizing it to get to where you can get right at that spot where you want, which tends to be somewhere around 1K, where you get that sort of mid-range bite that you would typically want when you want a lo-fi drum sound or a lo-fi vocal. The last macro that I mapped was simply an instance of the J37 tape plugin so that I can get just that extra little bit of softening. Sometimes when you want something lo-fi, you want it to be kind of hard-edged and sort of small and in your face, but sometimes you want it to be actually very soft and sound like something old, like an old recording. So the J37 does a really good job of that when you push the input really, really high. What I've done is I've mapped the input to this knob here, this macro. And you can really hear the difference as I start to fade that up. So it really softens up the transients and just makes the whole thing sound like a super old recording, which typically doesn't have the super snappy, fast transients. This is one of the great things about Studio Rack is it allows you to create these things that you wouldn't necessarily get these results by just stacking plugins in your DAW. When you have it all pre-done for you. And then you can just start turning some of these knobs, because the way they interact together is not necessarily the way you would expect. So that's pretty much it. That's my super lo-fi plugin preset. I hope that helps you guys create and be inspired and be able to quickly dial in the type of lo-fi sound that you're looking for. And yeah, I hope you guys have fun with it.